The British Empire. By 1920, Britain controlled the largest empire in human history. It covered approximately 1/4 of the Earth's land surface, spanning roughly 13.7 million square miles across every continent. The empire ruled over 450 million people, nearly a quarter of the world's population at the time. Britain controlled vital territories, including India, Egypt, large portions of Africa, Canada, Australia, and strategic naval bases worldwide. The phrase, "the sun never sets on the British Empire," was literally true. At any given moment, somewhere in the empire, it was daylight. But the empire that had taken centuries to build began showing cracks almost immediately after reaching its peak. World War I had cost Britain enormously. Over 880,000 British soldiers died. The financial burden was staggering, leaving Britain deeply in debt to the United States. The war had also awakened nationalist movements across the empire. Colonies that had sent soldiers to fight for Britain now questioned why they remained under British rule. In India, Mahatma Gandhi's non-violent resistance movement gained momentum, challenging British authority through civil disobedience rather than armed rebellion. Ireland, after centuries of British rule, fought a war of independence that resulted in the Irish Free State in 1922. The empire was beginning to fracture. World War II delivered the breaking point. Britain entered the war in 1939 and fought for 6 years. The financial cost was catastrophic. Britain borrowed heavily from the United States, ending the war virtually bankrupt. Military losses exceeded 450,000 dead. More critically, the war shattered the illusion of British invincibility. Japan's rapid conquest of British territories in Southeast Asia, including the humiliating fall of Singapore in 1942, demonstrated that Britain could no longer defend its far-flung possessions. The British Indian Army, which had been crucial to maintaining control in Asia, was exhausted. Britain simply didn't have the resources, money, or military strength to hold its territories against rising independence movements. The empire had become impossible to sustain. The collapse came rapidly. India and Pakistan gained independence in 1947, costing Britain its most valuable colonial possession. The 1956 Suez Crisis proved definitively that Britain was no longer a superpower. When Britain and France attempted to retake the Suez Canal from Egypt, the United States and Soviet Union forced them to withdraw. Britain had to accept that it could no longer act independently on the world stage. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, decolonization accelerated. African and Caribbean territories gained independence one after another. By the time Britain handed Hong Kong back to China in 1997, the empire had effectively ceased to exist. Today, the Commonwealth remains as a voluntary association of former British territories, but it holds no real power. The empire that once ruled a quarter of humanity dissolved in less than 50 years. The Russian Empire. By 1913, Russia was the largest contiguous empire on Earth, stretching from Poland in the west to the Pacific Ocean in the east, covering over 8.8 million square miles. Tsar Nicholas II ruled as absolute monarch over approximately 165 million people from dozens of ethnic groups. The empire controlled vast resources, maintained the world's largest standing army, and was considered one of Europe's great powers. The Romanov dynasty had ruled for over 300 years. On the surface, the empire appeared stable and powerful.
Beneath that surface, massive problems were building. Russia's industrialization lagged decades behind Western Europe and the United States. The vast majority of the population were peasants living in severe poverty with no political rights. Land ownership was concentrated among the nobility while millions starved. In 1905, Russia's defeat in the Russo-Japanese War exposed the military's weakness and incompetence. The humiliation sparked the 1905 revolution, where workers and peasants demanded change. Tsar Nicholas II made minor concessions, creating a limited parliament called the Duma, but retained absolute power. The warning signs were clear, but the monarchy refused meaningful reform. World War I destroyed what remained of the empire's stability. Russia entered the war in 1914, mobilizing millions of soldiers. The Russian military was poorly equipped, badly led, and unprepared for modern warfare. By 1917, approximately 3 million Russian soldiers had been killed or wounded. The economy collapsed under the strain of war production. food shortages became severe in cities. Soldiers at the front lacked basic supplies, including boots, rifles, and ammunition. Entire units mutinied or simply deserted. The population's faith in the Tsar's leadership evaporated completely. Nicholas II made the catastrophic decision to personally take command of the military in 1915, making himself directly responsible for every defeat. In February 1917, bread riots in Petrograd turned into mass protests. When soldiers ordered to suppress the demonstrations instead joined them, the regime was finished. Nicholas II abdicated on March 15, 1917, ending the Romanov dynasty. A provisional government attempted to continue the war and implement reforms, but it couldn't solve Russia's fundamental problems. On October 25, 1917, Vladimir Lenin's Bolsheviks seized power in a nearly bloodless coup, promising peace, land, and bread. The Russian Empire was formally dissolved. A brutal civil war followed, lasting until 1922. The Bolsheviks won and established the Soviet Union. In July 1918, Nicholas II and his entire family were executed by Bolshevik forces in Yekaterinburg. The 300-year-old empire had collapsed in less than a year, replaced by the world's first communist state, the Mongol Empire. By 1279, the Mongols controlled the largest contiguous land empire in human history. It stretched from Korea in the east to Hungary in the west, from Siberia in the north to the Arabian Peninsula in the south, covering approximately 24 million square kilometers. The empire ruled over 100 million people. Founded by Genghis Khan in 1206, the Mongols had conquered more territory in 25 years than the Romans had in 400. Their military prowess was unmatched. Their administrative systems facilitated trade across Asia. The Silk Road flourished under Mongol protection, connecting east and west like never before. But the empire's massive size contained the seeds of its destruction. After Genghis Khan's death in 1227, the empire was divided among his sons and grandsons. By 1259, when Great Khan Munk died, the empire had already fractured into 4 major khanates: the Golden Horde in Russia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Yuan dynasty in China. These divisions were supposed to remain unified under a single Great Khan, but succession disputes erupted immediately. Kublai Khan claimed the title, but his cousin Arik Bok contested it. A 4-year civil war followed. Kublai won, but the damage was done. The khanates began operating independently, pursuing their own interests rather than imperial unity. Overextension accelerated the collapse. Kublai Khan focused his attention and resources on consolidating power in China and attempting to conquer Japan. His invasion attempts against Japan in 1274 and 1281 both failed catastrophically, with typhoons destroying his fleets.
Meanwhile, the other khanates grew increasingly autonomous. The Golden Horde converted to Islam and focused on Russia and Eastern Europe. The Ilkhanate also converted to Islam and became absorbed in Persian politics. Without a strong central authority or unified succession system, the empire fragmented into rival states that sometimes fought each other. The final blows came from multiple directions. In 1368, the Ming dynasty overthrew Mongol rule in China, driving the Yuan dynasty back to Mongolia. The Black Death, which originated in Central Asia, devastated Mongol territories in the 1340s, killing millions and disrupting trade routes that had been the empire's economic foundation. The remaining khanates gradually converted to local cultures and religions, losing their distinct Mongol identity. By the late 14th century, what had been a unified empire was now a collection of independent states with no connection to each other.
Timur, a Turco-Mongol conqueror, briefly attempted to restore Mongol glory in the 1380s and 1390s, but his empire died with him in 1405. By the early 1500s, the last remnants of Mongol political power had disappeared. The largest land empire ever assembled had completely dissolved within 150 years of its peak. The Roman Empire. By 117 AD, Rome controlled the largest empire the Mediterranean world had ever seen. Under Emperor Trajan, the empire stretched approximately 5 million square kilometers, from Britain in the northwest to Mesopotamia in the east, from the Rhine and Danube rivers in the north to the Sahara Desert in the south. The empire ruled between 50 and 90 million people, roughly a quarter of the world's population at the time. Roman roads connected hundreds of cities. Roman law governed diverse peoples. The Mediterranean Sea was literally called Mare Nostrum, our sea. Rome appeared invincible and eternal. The decline began in the 3rd century. Between 235 and 284 AD, the empire experienced what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. During this period, at least 50 different men claimed the title of emperor, most dying violently within months or years. Germanic tribes repeatedly invaded across the northern borders. The Sassanid Persian Empire attacked from the east. Economic inflation spiraled out of control as emperors debased currency to pay the military. Plague epidemics killed millions. Trade collapsed. Cities shrank. The unified empire that had maintained peace for 2 centuries was tearing itself apart. Emperor Diocletian attempted to save the empire through radical reorganization. In 285 AD, he divided it into eastern and western halves, each with its own emperor. The split was intended to make the empire more manageable and defensible. In 330 AD, Emperor Constantine moved the capital from Rome to Constantinople, a new city built on the strategic site of Byzantium. The eastern half, with its wealthy cities and defensible borders, became the center of imperial power. The western half, poorer and more exposed to Germanic invasions, grew weaker. The division that was meant to strengthen the empire instead formalized its fracture. The Western Roman Empire collapsed in stages. In 410 AD, Visigoths under King Alaric sacked Rome itself, the first time in 800 years that foreign enemies had breached the city's walls. In 455 AD, Vandals sacked Rome again, giving us the word vandalism. The Western emperors became puppets controlled by Germanic military commanders. On September 4, 476 AD, the Germanic chieftain Odoacer deposed the last Western Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, a teenager with no real power. Odoacer didn't bother proclaiming himself emperor. He simply declared that the Western Empire no longer existed. The Eastern Roman Empire, later called the Byzantine Empire, survived for another 1,000 years until Constantinople fell to the Ottoman Turks in 1453. But the western half fragmented into Germanic kingdoms. The empire that had unified the Mediterranean world for 5 centuries was gone, replaced by the fragmented medieval kingdoms of Europe.
The Egyptian Empire. By 1450 BC, during the reign of Pharaoh Thutmose III, Egypt controlled the most powerful empire in the ancient world. The new kingdom stretched from Nubia in the south deep into modern-day Sudan to the Euphrates River in the northeast, encompassing modern Syria. Egyptian armies had defeated the Mitanni Empire and dominated the Levant. Egypt controlled crucial trade routes, vast gold mines in Nubia, and the agricultural wealth of the Nile Delta. Thutmose III led 17 military campaigns, never losing a battle. Egyptian culture, religion, and architecture reached heights never seen before. This was Egypt's golden age. The empire's decline began after the death of Ramesses II in 1213 BC. Ramesses had ruled for 66 years, maintaining Egypt's power through military strength and diplomatic marriages. But his death left a succession crisis. His son, Merneptah, faced immediate threats. Around 1177 BC, a confederation of invaders known as the Sea Peoples attacked Egypt and other Bronze Age civilizations. Their origins remain mysterious, but their impact was catastrophic. They destroyed the Hittite Empire, devastated coastal cities, and disrupted Mediterranean trade networks. Egypt survived the invasions, but barely. The cost in military resources and economic damage was enormous. The Bronze Age collapse that destroyed Egypt's trading partners left the empire isolated and weakened. Over the following centuries, Egypt fell under repeated foreign domination. By 945 BC, Libyan pharaohs ruled Egypt, marking the first time in over 1,500 years that native Egyptians didn't control their own kingdom. In 747 BC, Nubian kings from the south conquered Egypt, establishing the 25th dynasty. The Assyrian Empire invaded in 671 BC, sacking the ancient capital of Thebes and installing puppet rulers. In 525 BC, the Persian Empire, under Cambyses II, conquered Egypt, making it a province of the Achaemenid Empire. Egypt briefly regained independence in 404 BC, but the freedom lasted less than 60 years before Persia reconquered it in 343 BC. The final end came with Alexander the Great's conquest in 332 BC. Egyptians initially welcomed Alexander as a liberator from Persian rule. After Alexander's death in 323 BC, one of his generals, Ptolemy, established the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. For nearly 300 years, Greek-speaking Macedonians ruled as pharaohs. The last of the Ptolemaic rulers was Cleopatra VII. After her defeat by Rome and suicide in 30 BC, Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire. A civilization that had endured for over 3,000 years, that had built the pyramids, created hieroglyphic writing, and ruled as a great power for centuries, was finally absorbed into another empire. Ancient Egyptian culture, language, and religion gradually disappeared under Greek and Roman influence, replaced by Hellenistic and eventually Christian traditions. 5 empires, 5 different eras, one common pattern. Every empire followed the same arc. They rose through military conquest and superior organization. They peaked when administration and trade created wealth and stability. They declined when complexity became unmanageable, when borders stretched too far, when succession crises divided leadership, when economic strain exceeded resources. They fell when internal weakness met external pressure at the same moment. Overextension appeared in every collapse. Empires grew until they couldn't defend their borders or govern their territories effectively. Economic crisis was universal. War costs, inflation, trade disruption, or resource depletion drained imperial treasuries. Internal division weakened them all. Civil wars, succession disputes, regional fragmentation, or class conflict. External enemies finished what internal problems started. No empire survives forever. Each creates the conditions of its own destruction. The larger they grow, the harder they fall. Power concentrated eventually disperses. The cycle has repeated throughout history and will continue as long as empires exist. If you found this video informative, subscribe for more historical content. Share your thoughts or suggest the next historical topic in the comments below.